I'm John Kahn. I'm the COO of Breitbart. Thank you so much for coming to this amazing event. We want to thank our sponsors, Build American AI, T1, and API. And our event partners, as always, CGCN and Alpha Institute. We've got a big program today. We're going to get started right off the bat with the Executive Director of Build American AI, Nathan Lemur, and Washington Bureau Chief, Matt Boyle.
And thank you for sponsoring. Lots to talk about here, but I think the biggest thing is, first off, introduce us to who is Build American AI. What are you guys doing? How do you fit into this exciting policy discussion that's happening on the cutting edge of technology and energy?
No, that's a great question. Great to be here. I guess the only way to get someone to talk to me is to sponsor them, so it works out pretty well. My wife should do this too. So
you have a standing invite to come on Breitbart News Saturday, which I host on Saturday morning, so whenever you want, let me know.
I serve as Executive Director of Build American AI. We are a 6-month-old C4 focusing on advocating for American leadership in AI. And a huge part of that is working with policymakers in Washington, D.C., working in the federal agencies, with the White House, members of Congress, to kind of tell the positive story of AI. But also help them understand that AI has so much promise and opportunity for their constituents, and it's a catalyst for unimaginable economic wealth and abundance. And we kind of have to cut through a lot of the myths out there about it to help policymakers see that we need a national framework to allow America to take the lead, but then also need to empower entrepreneurs around the country to leverage this technology to create new ideas and new things.
So what are some of those myths that you're talking about? Address them for us.
I think part of it is the myths kind of come back to a lot of people watched WALL-E and they see the movie WALL-E and they think we're just going to become, robots ourselves. And the reality is that's not the case. We have an opportunity to leverage this technology to be more productive, to create new things we didn't expect, to learn from the history of, the blacksmiths turned into mechanics and turned into next generation spaceships and all sorts of rockets. And so you can leverage technology to go from one thing to the next and have so much more opportunity.
So we were talking in the lead up to this about several places around the country that have kind of become little AI hubs, if you will. One of the places is El Segundo, California. There's Lockhart, Texas, Detroit, Michigan. You were mentioning to me just now that you just have figured out some things about the great state of Pennsylvania. We're going to hear from Senator McCormack, the new senator from Pennsylvania, here shortly. He hosted a big event on AI last year in Pennsylvania, got $92 billion of commitments. But tell us about these places that are embracing this and then seeing these little economic booms in their areas.
Yeah, so the difference between AI and the kind of Silicon Valley boom is a lot of the Web 2.0 internet companies we know really centered around Silicon Valley, right? They all kind of centered in California. The exciting things about AI is the diffusion of this technology in communities around the country. And what AI enables is us to bring jobs back into the reindustrializing of middle America. I read this great article by a CEO of a travel logistics company in Nashville, Tennessee. They explained that it takes 30,000 truckloads of copper and concrete and steel to build just one data center. That also employs thousands upon hundreds of thousands of employees, electricians, builders, construction workers, plumbers, etc. But beyond that, you have these startup communities like Prototown, which is in Lockhart, Texas, you mentioned, the Gundo, and then also Pittsburgh as well, in Detroit, just for examples, who are now actually making things again. They're using AI to actually make real tangible things, whether it's a satellite space bus, which is the harnesses to send satellites into space, which we need for LEO satellites, like Elon Musk's company, or other companies. One was called Gecko in Pittsburgh. It's a guy named Jake Lazarzio. He's a Grove City grad who started a company in Pittsburgh. He said it best. He said, Silicon Valley said, you can't build anywhere outside of Silicon Valley. We're like, let's build in Pittsburgh. I want to be here. And this robotics company is building robots that actually can go into submarines and decommissioned decommission basically old freights and stuff from the military, and actually kind of help them figure out where the corrosion happened or where different problems were in the machines and fix them. So now we can get these submarines and battleships and stuff back into commission. And it's really exciting technology. And again, you're like, well, robots are going to replace the jobs. No, that company is hiring now 200-300 people who weren't there employed before, and now bringing opportunity into Pittsburgh.
Yeah, so I mean, there's been a lot of discussion about with the advent of AI that this is going to be economically disruptive, that there's going to be changes to the jobs world and whatnot. But it sounds like what you're saying is there's a lot of different jobs coming in. Can you talk to us a little bit about that? Because I think there was a quote from, I want to say, John Phelan, and I'm going to butcher the quote, but it's something along the lines of, we spent the last 10 years telling everybody to learn to code. Now we're going to spend the next 10 years telling everybody to work with their hands again. These are blue-collar jobs that you're talking about that are coming in.
No, that's exactly right. I think a lot of people who are making doomer predictions about AI causing job loss and stuff are a lot of people who need to see sunlight more. There are a lot of nerds who like to code themselves and build LLMs and stuff, but the reality is that AI is actually enabling new opportunities in actually building and creating, but also actually reminding us the value of human-to-human interaction. The future of AI is actually not robotics, but actually enabling humans to leverage our ability to communicate and to have that empathy and sympathy for one another, to actually go a different mile. Starbucks, just for example, is moving away from their robotics approach because they realize customers don't want to be served by a robot. They want to have that human-to-human interaction. Something kind of funny about someone actually writing my name wrong on a Starbucks cup, or I saw an article recently about there was analysis of different. This is not where the future of AI is, but future of fast food, which is the companies that are succeeding understand customer service. It's not just fast food; that's also in every part of our lives, and that's the exciting thing about this technology.
So you've mentioned at the beginning here national framework.
Yes.
You have a national framework. I have right here the printout of the White House's national policy framework. I think it's the beginning of this idea. It's like a 4-page document they released in March. When you say a national framework, can you explain that for us? What are you guys looking for here? A lot of conservatives like states' rights. They don't want to see the federal government overarching on things, but at the same time, do you really want to let a leftist California run the show here, right? So kind of explain that for us and what you guys specifically are looking for.
So the future of AI, success of AI in America depends on learning lessons from the past. Inherently, internet policy is interstate. This is the value of the Commerce Clause. You can't just have one state do one thing and another state do the other. We saw this in telecommunications. I come from the FCC world. You can't have different rules of the road. You need a Federal Communications Commission, right? You need internet policy at the national level, whether it's the Communications Decency Act or Telecommunications Act from 1996. You need these national policies to kind of lay the rules of the road. In lieu of that, you have these states who are creating their own approaches. Colorado has their approach, which, by the way, is driving companies from Colorado. Right now, there's people who can't deal with the compliance costs in small AI startups, so they're fleeing that state. California in the same way. But it's also red states, too, are tempted to pass laws that look good, but they also have these compliance costs that are actually driving up problems for small businesses and driving them away from certain states. And so what we would like to see is a national framework that protects consumers and enables innovation while also mitigating potential harms, real and potential harms. First and foremost, children. How do we protect kids? And there's a lot of good ideas at the federal level about how to we can write the rules of the road in a way that makes sense to protect children, but also enable innovation. And I think the White House has a really good template for how Congress can do that. Members of Congress are working together on that. We're seeing questions about transparency and national security concerns. This is good at a national level, not dictated by California or Rhode Island or Colorado.
Yeah, so the last big thing I'd ask you about here, and we have in the room with us right now, there are representatives from the European Union. I know there's folks from the Greek government. At our events, there's been folks from all around the world. The big question, we're going to see President Trump visit China later this week. This is the fight of the century, right? It's between the United States and China, and there's maybe no other policy agenda item more important than the future of AI, because that's going to be the future of the world. The kind of explain for us and put in context for us how this all fits together in the bigger. I mean, look, it's either the U.S. is going to lead the world on this stuff, or China is going to lead the world on this stuff. How do we win? How do we win this fight?
I think it's a two-front war. One is communicating to the American people and demonstrating to the American people that these are job opportunities in America. There's economic opportunity and a boon that we can see here that's coming to fruition. But also on the other side is American leadership is needed. Otherwise, China's going to lead the way. And that's going to put us at a disadvantage. That's why we need to build out capacity for a future of AI. It's like data centers and revamping our energy grid, but also about setting the rules of the road so it's our framework people are following, not others.
All right, well, Nathan Leamer from Build American AI, sir, really want to thank you for joining us here. I think we're going to welcome up to the stage next. We're going to have Senator David McCormack from the great state of Pennsylvania. But Nathan, thank you, sir.
It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Yep. So if we can bring up Senator McCormack. Senator McCormack, thanks for joining us here. Good to see you.
How are you?
Exciting stuff. Thanks for doing this. So,
President Trump was in Pennsylvania, and he got on the stage and he said, from the great state of Pennsylvania, and he goes, whoa, 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 whoa. It's the great Commonwealth.
the Commonwealth.
He goes, you can lose an election. He looked at me. You can lose an election if you ever call it a state. So, Matt, I just saved you right there. Never run for office.
If I ever run for office in Pennsylvania. Okay, so Senator, lots to talk about here. Let's just start with the bigger, broader picture here, which is that the theme of this event here is the intersection of artificial intelligence and energy. And I think you would agree that you can't have one without the other. They're interconnected. To do the future of AI, we need a massive increase in energy. Talk to us about the interconnectivity of the two major areas of policy.
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's great to be here and see lots of friends in the audience. So thanks for having me. I think it's the most consequential moment in our lifetimes. But I would say it's the most consequential moment in human history, which is a huge thing to say, right? But just think about it. Has there ever been a moment in human history where the pace of change has been so fast and accelerating? And what's different about this technology is that it innovates on top of itself. So it is changing at breakneck speed. And it's not just AI. When you say AI is a thing in and of itself, but AI in the way it's affecting defense, the way it's affecting life sciences. So it's a profound change for our society. And as you say, you can't say AI without saying energy in the same sentence, because energy innovation and the energy revolution is a prerequisite of being able to scale the AI and the compute power necessary to drive this innovation. And I think America and the world is certainly waking up to that. And Mike was a big part of this. We hosted, Dean and I hosted, my wife, a summit in Pennsylvania, which was designed to really reinforce that. Because if you want to be an AI leader, we want Pennsylvania to be the AI leader in America. The reason we think we're well positioned to do that is because we're an energy leader. And we've been lagging as a country on our energy production capabilities because of misplaced priorities, overregulation, really being hijacked by the environmental activists. And we're now just awakening with President Trump's leadership, to what energy dominance really means. And we're making great steps in that direction, but those steps have to accelerate at the same pace that AI is accelerating, or we're not going to keep up. And so we're in a race, not just with China, but we're in a race to have the energy capability to keep up. And as I tell our governor, Governor Shapiro, who's a Democrat in Pennsylvania, I say we're also in a race with Tennessee and Georgia and Florida and Texas, because the capital needed to support the energy infrastructure, needed to support the AI, and the talent, capital and talent are like water. They go the path of least resistance. So we want to make sure Pennsylvania and America is the place that the capital and the talent land to ensure our leadership.
So you mentioned the event that you hosted in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania,
right. Exactly.
The Commonwealth of Pennsylvania last year. A very ambitious move for a freshman senator. You guys, I believe you secured more than $90 billion worth of commitments, and in terms of future investments. We just heard from Nathan Lemur about some things that are happening in Pittsburgh, which are exciting. Talk to us about where things stand in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania and where things are going from.
Well, I think so. First, that turned out to be just a great event because the president was kind enough to come and really spearhead that. Most of the members of his cabinet came. We had the governor came, Senator Fetterman came, but we had industry leaders, CEOs from energy, CEOs from the hyperscalers and from the AI world, CEOs from the investment world. We had global investors, the CEO of GIC, the big Singaporean sovereign wealth fund, Mubadala, the big Abu Dhabi fund. We had national labor leaders. So there was two things I want to highlight about that. First, it was the first time to my knowledge, and Mike or you may know different, Matt, but I think it's the first time to my knowledge that you had that level, the president, the cabinet, but also leaders, not just from energy, but from AI and from the world of capital markets and labor leadership, all in the same room. And that's what it takes. And by the way, it was bipartisan. This is a team sport. If we're going to win in this existential battle with China, we need to get all those people at the table. You can't get the AI companies out on their own or the energy companies out on their own. Everybody needs to be integrated. This is like winning World War II. That's kind of integration across America to be able to persevere. So that was the first thing. Second thing, in the investment, those $92 billion, $50 billion of the $92 billion was energy infrastructure. So we have to invest enormously to be able to keep up with the demand. $40 billion was in data centers. And on the energy infrastructure side, there's new production capability. I want to talk about some of the things going on there. It's remarkable. But there's also the transmission and having the energy infrastructure to be able to keep up with this demand. By most estimates, I think the energy demand is supposed to triple in the next 15 years or so. So the transmission and everything along with that needs to keep up. And I think with President Trump's leadership, we're in the right direction. But it can't be done by executive order alone. There's got to be a lot of congressional work, permitting reform, and lots of other things to make it a reality.
Yeah, no, so I couldn't agree more, and I want to get into a lot of that stuff, and I know you've just introduced some major legislation, but before we do, I want to talk about China, because that is the existential threat. President Trump is going there later this week. He is going to go meet with Xi Jinping, official state visit. It's the first of what is likely to be 4 major interactions between the two world leaders this year. I think the president has invited Xi here for a formal state visit later in the year, and then I think there are summits in both countries, G20, and then there's another one in Beijing later in the year as well. What are some of the things you're hoping to see from President Trump on the energy and AI front when he goes to meet with Xi later this week?
Well, I think it has to start with China's our adversary. So this is, I support the notion of diplomatic conversations, diplomacy with our adversaries, but there's nothing that's going to come out of this summit that's going to make China not our primary adversary, our primary threat to America and America's interests. So we shouldn't get confused about who we're dealing with here. With that said, I think there's probably an agenda that's going to be associated with what's going on in Iran, because obviously, and that's a lot of that's about energy, because China is so dependent on Iran and the Strait of Hormuz. And if you ever wondered the importance of energy dominance, this moment when we have conflict in the Middle East should reinforce the necessity of not only having adequate energy for America's needs, but being able to export around the world. So I think that'll be front and center. I'm sure AI will be front and center too, and I think there's probably some good ideas that might come from having good coordination and collaboration on AI. But we're in a race for leadership of AI with China. And my view on this is it depends a lot more on what we do than on what China does, on whether we're going to win that AI race. So I don't think we're going to stop China from doing whatever China is going to do. And China is always going to do what it's going to do against our interest, including stealing our technology and our IP and everything else. So we need to block that and take steps, and I've tried to do that with some of the legislation that I've supported. But our leadership is going to depend on us deregulating and permitting. It's going to depend on us having an AI framework and legislation that doesn't curtail innovation, that doesn't allow states to hijack the AI agenda and have a fragmented regulatory structure. So we, because we're the most innovative society in the world, are well positioned to win, but it depends on what we do. And so I don't think we're going to get any great lessons on AI from China. I think we're going to mostly be talking about fair trade, rare earth minerals and metals, Iran, and maybe a broad AI framework, but we shouldn't count on China to help us much.
So speaking of framework, I have right here the national policy framework from the White House that they released on artificial intelligence. It's a 4-page document. So it sounds like your view is that we need to see, and throughout this, by the way, they call on Congress to take several actions. But it sounds like your view is that we need at least something to kind of nationally set this up, rather than a state-by-state patchwork that then creates an arms race between California and Texas and everybody else in between.
Yeah, I absolutely think we need a national framework, and that we should take the president's executive order and the AI plan and think about the right legislation that would be consistent and aligned with that. But I think the risk is over-regulating, particularly too soon. It's moving so quickly that it's, first of all, you have in Congress not a lot of people who understand this arena much, and I'm not putting myself in the category of being I think we need to learn a lot. I think it's moving so quickly. So there's certainly risk of under-regulating or under-legislating, but I think there's bigger risk in over-legislating and over-regulating. So I think we've got to get that balance right. And I think we need to do the things that we know are absolutely critical to being able to win the AI race, which is permitting reform, which the energy dominance agenda can't become a reality without making fundamental changes in terms of how we think about energy policy. I think that's where the focus should be. I think allowing states on specific issues, how AI will be applied within their states. Specific protections around children, I'm particularly concerned about that. I've supported a lot of legislation around social media restrictions. So I think there's restrictions that are very targeted that we should be considering, but a broader AI framework, I think, needs to recognize we're in the nascent stages of this phenomenal moment, and we don't want to stand in the way of the innovation that's going to essentially be required for us to remain a superpower.
Yeah, so I promise I'm getting to permitting reform soon. But I've got another big question on AI.
It's Mike. Mike's the one who wants to talk about permitting.
we're going to do a whole section of this on permitting reform. I promise. On AI, I want to also talk about the jobs impact on this. There's been a lot of people talking about, and they're not wrong, that this is going to be majorly disruptive to the workforce as we know it now. But again, we just heard from Nathan Lemur from Build American AI about different kinds of jobs that are coming along, a lot more blue-collar jobs, which again, people of Pennsylvania, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, are very ready to deal with. So talk to us a little bit about that, about what the jobs world looks like as this all materializes.
I think the start is to acknowledge and recognize this is going to be very disruptive. It's already becoming disruptive. And so I think if you're a public official, you're in this arena, if you're somehow trying to suggest that this isn't going to be profoundly disruptive to our society, the nature of work, the nature of productivity, national security, it is. It is. Like all periods of technological change, the Industrial Revolution, it's going to be disruptive. So I think we have to lean into, yes, this is going to be disruptive. We don't know how disruptive, we don't know in what ways necessarily, but we have to lean into that. That's the first thing. I think the second thing is, at least in Pennsylvania, it has been a boom for skilled labor. I mean, unbelievable. I was literally just the last 3 days, I went to Beaver Valley nuclear facility. There's a whole nuclear modernization. There's going to be thousands of jobs on an upgrade there. I went to Shippingport, which is coal conversion to natural gas. It's 1.2 gigawatts. It's thousands of workers on this plant. And then I went to the most impressive site, which is Homer City, and got a review of the update. 4.4 gigawatts. That's 1% of American energy demand right there. And one place in Homer City in western Pennsylvania, Indiana County, which is a coal plant that's being converted to natural gas. So this is happening. And it's not just in AI, it's not just data centers. It's with advanced manufacturing, it's with, and because of the energy and because of the AI, you're seeing all sorts of other business. Eli Lilly just is building a new plant in the Lehigh Valley. It's all related to what this big revolution that we're happening. So on the skilled labor front, I mean, I was with all the trade unions last week, and they cannot believe how much work is coming and is projected. So that's the positive story. And whether you're an electrician or a welder or a pipe fitter or steam fitter, this looks like pretty bountiful times. Now for a lot of other jobs, particularly kids coming out of college, I have 6 daughters. 3 of them are in college, 3 are out of college. We see the uncertainty. It's moving dramatically. Computer scientist, which you would have thought 5 years ago was the most secure job you could get, is not very secure anymore. So I think we're going to have to help young people adopt to that. And I think the key is making sure that in this embrace of AI, which we have to embrace to lead, we also have to help people learn how to take advantage of all that comes with it. And there are millions of small businesses in the United States that when they apply AI to their business models are going to grow and prosper and evolve in ways that are unexpected. There's all sorts of new businesses that will be created because of AI that will offset that disruption. Most of the people in this room are too young to remember, probably with the internet boom. I was running a software company in the middle of that. Businesses we never even imagined sprung up in the late 90s. So there's going to be huge opportunity, but it's going to be disruptive as heck. And the best way we can help people deal with the disruption is to make sure they have the skills, the agility to be able to accommodate the change. And I think that's what we owe the next generation. We owe old people that too, by the way. There's high anxiety among older people as well, but the younger workers in particular, we need to train.
Right. So now, of course, to do AI, you need a massive increase in energy production in this country. I think the data centers require something like an extra 25% or close to it, extra electricity output. We got to produce a lot more energy. To do that, you have introduced a major piece of legislation, permitting reform.
Thanks for bringing it up.
Which Unleash American Energy and Jobs Act. Tell us about this, because it has 4 major parts of permitting reform that you've put forward. Can you tell us about this legislation? What would it do? How would it help unleash the production of American energy?
Yeah, well, this is not a novel idea. There's lots of people who have been talking about this for a long time, but I just want to reinforce the importance of it. I think most in this room probably know. But if you look at the energy demand that's required, we cannot get the energy production in place quick enough to meet the need. And a big part of that is that our permitting process, whether it's for an LNG facility, or whether it's for a pipeline, or whether it's for a fracking site, or whether it's for a nuclear facility, or whether it's for just an update, upgrade on transmission lines, takes years and years and years. And what happened was laws that were well-meaning, like the Clean Water Act, have been hijacked by environmental activists, not with the purpose of actually getting an appropriate resolution of a particular project, but by hijacking the process, delaying it, and ultimately canceling investment. And if you're an investor, which I was for a number of years, the worst thing in the world for you is uncertainty, where you can't allocate capital knowing that that capital is actually going to get deployed in a way that's going to generate a return. And so what it means is that projects either don't get launched or they get killed. So in Pennsylvania alone, we had 3 big pipeline projects, which would have been massive for Pennsylvania, huge exports up north to New York or south to Maryland and Delaware and other places, that were killed because they couldn't get the permits. So what this legislation seeks to do, and by the way, just to give you a sense, a permit on average takes 5.5, 6 years on most things. It took 3.5 years to win World War II. To put this in perspective, this is unnatural. This is not what the legislators envisioned when they passed these laws, and they've been contorted in a way that's not consistent with America's interest. This is not to say that we don't need environmental reviews. I'm all for environmental reviews. It's to say that we need those done in a thoughtful, rigorous way where they're finished and done and you can invest. So what the legislation seeks to do is limit the amount of time for review to, say, 1 year. Ensure that once a decision is made, It's irrevocable. In other words, it can't be further litigated down the path. And if you're going to turn down a project, then you have to have a written justification for doing so. It's obviously a lot more complicated than that, but that's the essence of it. And the reason I want to focus on that seems so common sense. Doesn't it just seem so common sense? If we can do that, what's going to happen is that there's $1.5 trillion of capital that's stranded on the sidelines waiting to invest. And so when I've talked to President Trump about this, or Secretary Wright or Secretary Burgum, who I know you're going to have next, I've said this isn't just energy policy. This is economic policy. If you think about the biggest thing we could do to stimulate our economy in the final years of the Trump administration, it would be permitting reform that unlocks all that capital. And so this has been something that's been debated in past Congresses. There's a good effort underway. Shelley Moore Capito is leading the charge for in the Senate right now. But I basically wanted to lay out a blueprint for what would be the most simple but most comprehensive permitting reform you could do that would have the biggest bang for the buck, sort of a businessman's perspective on the thing that would change the outcome. And that's what that legislation has done. And Mike can attest to this. When that legislation came out, you see people coming out from across industry, across the trade. Everybody recognizes this is the biggest thing we can do. So I'm hoping this will bring further attention to it, and we can get this done in this Congress. It's an uphill battle, there's no doubt about it, but the consequences of getting it right are so profound that I think it's worth really running hard at it.
Well, we're certainly rooting for you guys on this. So now, when it comes to energy more broadly here, one of the things that the Trump administration has done, and we're going to hear from Secretary Bergum about this, I'm sure he's going to talk about all the steps that they've taken from the National Energy Dominance Council, et cetera, to get the drilling, exploration, everything going, right? Like in that we're producing a lot more American energy than we ever have before. Obviously, right now, when you have something like what's going on in Iran and the Strait of Hormuz, held up, it's very, very important that we produce a lot more energy. Can you talk to us about what we've seen so far from the Trump administration? We're a little over a year into the second term of President Trump. About what we've seen so far with regard to the increase in energy production, because we are drill baby drilling, it is happening.
No, it's happening, and I know Pennsylvania the best, obviously, but I think the big thing that's happening is that, and when we did that energy summit, people were like, it was July, and then in August, people were saying, where are the jobs? Where are the jobs? I'm like, geez, it's going to take a little while to get the jobs. What we're starting to see are the jobs. And there's two big things I'm seeing, and I'm really excited about. One is a lot of these coal-fired plants that were being shut down or had been shut down are essentially being revitalized as natural gas fired plant. And it's a huge add to the energy grid. That 4.4 gigawatts project in Homer City I mentioned, just to put in perspective, 3.4 gigawatts will be used on site for data centers and so forth there. It's a huge campus. But a gigawatt will be put onto the grid. So if you think about energy prices and the pushback on data centers, which I'm sure we'll get to, this is a big part of it, is creating more energy than the data centers consume is a critical part of getting that equation right. The second thing that I just want to say is strategically we made such a horrific mistake on nuclear power following 3 Mile Island. And I think under President Trump, you're seeing a rebirth and it's going to take a while. We got to shorten the permitting process. There's next generation technology on SMR and so forth. But if you think about the answer for closing the gap quickly, I think nuclear power could be part of it. And I have a little story which is relevant to this, which it just puts our decision. 3 Mile Island happened and essentially shut down the nuclear industry for the next 40 years. And 20 years ago, I guess, it was about 20 years ago, I worked in the Bush administration. And I worked for President Bush. And we were at a meeting. I was the Sherpa, which is the guy that would go negotiate on the summits. And we were in a meeting, and I was in the meeting with him. And it was Merkel, Angela Merkel, the Chancellor of Germany, and it was Sarkozy, who was the President of France. And in this very meeting, Merkel said, we are going to shut down all of our nuclear power in Germany, and also all of our fossil fuels. And Sarkozy said, we're going to double down on nuclear, just in that meeting. Now play it forward 20 years, something like 92% of France's energy comes from its nuclear power. It's been incredibly successful. It's safe, and it's created independence. And Germany has been dependent on Putin and Russian natural gas. And you see when you get into this crisis that Germany is essentially a hostage. So we made a similar mistake in nuclear power because of 3 Mile Island, which is obviously in Pennsylvania. But we didn't, and we made mistakes on other things. But because our energy resources are so incredibly robust, Pennsylvania alone, the Marcellus Shale, is the 4th largest natural gas reserves in the world. If Pennsylvania were a country, we'd be number 4. So this is enormous. We're enormously blessed. And so despite our stupidity, we still are in a position of energy dominance right now after just 4 years of President Trump getting us moving in the right direction in the first term and now reinvigorating that in the second term. But we still have a lot of catch up to do. And nuclear power, I think, offers the biggest opportunity. The other thing that's happening is under this administration, President Trump, in concert with the governor, but coal-fired plants that were being commissioned to be shut down have been extended. So just last week or 2 weeks ago, 2 big coal-fired plants in Pennsylvania. So you now start to see a sort of an all systems go. And I'm someone who says all sources of energy. So permitting reform would affect even solar, which is if it's financially viable, we should do that too. As long as we're not subsidizing and private capital is investing in it, I'm all for it. We need as much as we can get. It's not as good as baseload power, but that intermittent power is a good thing to add to the grid as well.
Yeah, so speaking of what we saw happen in Europe, one of the things I think that President Trump has done with energy, especially in his second term, but he did it a little bit in the first term too, has really used energy as a diplomatic tool to achieve American objectives, the America First agenda on the world stage, whether it's with our friends and allies or with our adversaries. We've seen what happened in Venezuela, of course, after the capture of Nicolas Maduro. Now American energy companies are active again in Venezuela. We see what's happening with Iran, so on and so forth, what's going on there. But we see what's happening with our friends and allies throughout the Middle East and the Gulf region and in Europe. I know there are senior officials here from the Greek government, for instance, and from the EU in the room here today. But for the Greeks are doing offshore drilling and exploration. I think they're the only country in Europe doing it, right? Like they've got Chevron and Exxon about to go in and start doing stuff off the islands there. I know you've got legislation on the East Med, but the point is that can you talk to us about energy as both a sword and an olive branch for achieving the American interest on the world stage, because I think it's something that President Trump has mastered as a diplomatic tool.
Well, it's absolutely the case. And, I would almost extend that a bit. We used to think about trade. I think most people used about the trade agenda. It's about tariffs, non-tariff barriers, and intellectual property. President Trump has expanded the economic agenda across everything. It's foreign direct investment. It's energy. And so all of a sudden, when you're, and of course, it was narrow the way, the defense folks are going to talk about the NATO. And the economic team is going to talk about trade relations. And the foreign direct investment will be the Treasury. No, it's the national strategy for a fair relationship, a mutually beneficial relationship, one that's advantageous to the United States. That's the way he's approached it. And the big stick, the long pole in the tent of American power is energy. And so for that reason, I think it's been a much more effective strategy for ensuring fairness. It's when you say that Europe is finally spending what it should on NATO as an example, well, that's not in isolation. That's in the totality of the relationship that he's defined. Second, the world is getting reshaped right now. There's been no time since World War II where the shape of geopolitics is changing so quickly with what happened in the Western Hemisphere with Venezuela, what will likely happen with Cuba, what's happening in the Middle East. But underlying all that is energy. And so if you think about just Venezuela and Iran, those two together, Venezuela has 18% of the petroleum reserves in the world. Iran has 30%. Now just imagine when the dust settles, if 30% of those reserves are in the hands of much more pro-Western governments, which I suspect they will be. Couple that with energy dominance, so America becoming a much more dominant player on the world stage. Couple that with the recent decision by the UAE to leave OPEC, and all of a sudden, geopolitics and energy politics are changing in a dramatic way, I think in a way that will be very advantageous to the United States because we're a much more energy dominant power. We just need to make sure that we do the things now that make this strategy permanent when President Trump leaves office. I don't just mean legislation, although legislation is part of it, but we're really retooling the whole country. Just in my election in 2024, I believe that the reason certainly President Trump would have maybe won either way, Pennsylvania, but I think certainly the reason I won and why he won is part because Kamala Harris and Bob Casey couldn't say the word fracking, right? I think that had a big thing to do with it. That's changing. The politics of energy are changing. So we need to make sure that this consensus around energy dominance is made more formal and permanent by legislation, but also by all the steps we take to ensure America's role in the world.
All right, and Senator, the last thing I want to ask you about here is just, as we were talking about in the last answer there with nuclear and all of the above kind of energy approach, of course this AI boom is going to require massive increase in electricity, and how do we do this in a way that doesn't pass on those costs to consumers? I know the White House and President Trump have put out the ratepayer protection plan that the president announced at the State of the Union address this year. Talk to us a little bit about that, and how do we keep the energy costs from going to the consumer?
Yeah, I think that's really important. I'm glad I had the opportunity. I'll be quick on this because I know we're out of time. But I think this is really an important thing because there's a backlash happening. There's a backlash because there's always backlashes in times of change and uncertainty. There's anxiety, understandably, disruption's real. But we need to confront that. And there's lots of different aspects of that. How do you, if this has huge concentration in wealth, which it looks like it's going to, how do you deal with that? And how do you deal with white collar disruption and so forth? But the one that I think we can deal with that's front and center is the pushback on data centers. I'm seeing this across Pennsylvania. And listen, no senator is going to come into Columbia County where I grew up and say, hey, you got to put a data center in there. Communities have to embrace this idea. And the only way they're going to embrace it, I think, is if there's a covenant where if these data centers are going to come into the community, that there's a deal. There's a deal on what that means. And what that means is they need to bring more energy than they consume, which in the end is going to bring down energy prices. They need to be clear on what the implications are going to be for labor. Are they going to hire people locally? They need to be clear on what the investment in the tax base is going to be. What does this mean for taxes in these local communities? What's it mean for schools? What's the deal? And I think if the parameters that right now there's a lot of misinformation, just like there was against fracking 15 years ago about water usage when 95% of it is recyclable water, or about energy consumptions when many are bringing more energy than using. So that covenant has to be made clear. That's consistent with what the president said. I think it needs to be even more comprehensive. And I think when these communities, I've discovered this, when a county commissioner or township supervisor gets all the facts, they can change overnight into their willingness to embrace. But if that vacuum or that misinformation isn't confronted with the actual business case of why this makes sense, and listen, for my state, we've lost a lot of people over the last 20 or 30 years. Communities like mine, where I grew up, had a carpet mill that had 2,000 workers when I was a kid, has 100 workers now. These are economic engines. Data centers, plus the energy go along with them, plus the logistics, plus all of this is an economic engine for a community, but you got to make sure the deal's clear. And so I think for those of you in the room that are involved either on the energy side or the AI side, I think we need to do a much better job of laying out in its completeness the opportunity for these communities. I think when they see that opportunity, most are going to embrace it, but right now we're in a sea of disinformation and misinformation. Some of that's probably intentional from the critics. Some of that may be from China and other places. But whatever it is, we got to confront it with facts. And with those facts, I think the many communities, most communities will embrace it.
Senator Dave McCormack from the great Commonwealth
All right,
Pennsylvania,
Matt,
sir.
you.
Thank you for joining us up here. Thank you, sir. And folks, I want to welcome up to the stage Dan Barcelo from T1 Energy is going to join us up here next. So, yep, Dan, if you want to come on up. So, Dan Barcelo from T1 Energy. How you doing, Dan? Good to see you again. We're getting to the main event soon, guys. Secretary Bergum should be here soon. But Dan, okay, so lots to talk about here. Now, I know you can't get ahead of things because you guys have a big earnings report coming out tomorrow. But just kind of give us an update about where T1 stands from, our last event, the last conversation that we had a couple months ago.
Sure. Thanks very much for having us again. Before I do that, there's a few things that the senator said that really resonate. I'd love to just touch on a few.
Yeah.
First of all, T1 Energy is a solar manufacturer. We have a 5 gigawatt asset in Texas. That's about 10% of America's capacity. We make American solar panels in America. We're building a solar cell plant for 2 gigawatts, will be even a larger percentage. So we're all about building an American solar supply chain in America for jobs and advanced manufacturing. But a few of the things the senator said that really resonate are this covenant of data centers with its communities. I worked in oil and gas my entire life until I was doing solar and storage. And oil and gas was always kind of like, it had that issue about where it belonged in a community. And technology, for the most part, did not. But what's really fascinating now is you see that whereas energy used to be governed by technology, now you see the opposite. So I think technology really now needs to understand that energy is the gating factor and the governor of that growth. So I think that's a critical point. The other point about coal, year over year from 25 to 24, it was coal and solar actually that had the change in energy year on year. Coal was driven by PJM, by MISO. Solar was more in ERCOT and California. And the point here was that was about coal getting a higher utilization rate, natural gas having a little higher price and being lower. But the point is, all of these energy sources are really critical. And what's important there is that you can see that solar has to be a big part of it because America is first and foremost a solar, is a summer peak-driven market. In the summertime, in the middle of the day, we have sun. If we're not utilizing and harnessing the solar for the southern part of America in particular, it's just a lack of resources there. Sorry, just in terms of our updates, we're on track to continue to build and start production by year-end for the solar cell plant. Still producing the solar modules. Still excited about the growth in the sector and the demand from the hyperscalers.
Okay, so now one of the big topics du jour here today, we heard this from the senator. I'm sure we're going to talk with the secretary about it. Believe me, I know what the questions are. Nobody else does, but I know what the questions are. But the energy demands that AI is demanding on our energy grid, and we have to massively increase the ability to produce energy. How do you guys fit into that equation? To meet the demands of AI. I mean, we're talking about 25% or more increase in American energy. So how does T1, how does solar fit into that equation?
Well, the thing with solar is it's quite scalable. So we have one asset, 1.2 million square feet in Dallas, that can produce 5 gigawatts of solar panels per year. So every single year we can pump out a 5 gigawatt solar farm. To double that capacity takes less than 9 months. It requires sub $500 million. So the point is it's scalable, it's producible, it's manufacturing, it's good jobs, and it's low cost. Once you start developing and putting out a solar farm, if we put aside the CapEx for a moment, which I'm not naive, I understand that's a critical part for funding, but once that asset is in place, like in Texas, for example, there is zero marginal cost power. That's why some days in the middle, for a lot of days in the middle of the summer, you'll see Texas grid is over 50% solar. So the key part is there is a 20 to 30 year asset life of a solar farm with near zero marginal cost that supports grids, and it's an important part. If I could touch on what other country, namely China, is doing.
Sure.
China produces two-thirds, they're now two-thirds of all the solar installations on Earth. China alone is more coal consumption than every other country on Earth together, and China's building more nukes than everyone else. So China dominates solar, dominates coal, dominates nuclear, yet their percentage of fossil fuels is declining to solar. So China sees the scalability part, and when you want to talk about dominance of energy, the scale that you touched on in your question that AI and data centers and hyperscalers and manufacturing will need is somewhat surreal, and solar plays an important part of that, and our mission here is just to make that solar and manufacture that in America.
So speaking of China, President Trump's going there later this week. I'm sure the AI is going to be, and energy are probably going to be topics that President Trump is going to talk with Chinese President Xi Jinping about. Tell us about where China stands. So you know they're definitely leaning in on this, no doubt about it. Especially as they're facing the problems of the Strait of Hormuz. I mean, it's not like the oil that comes out of the Strait of Hormuz is coming to America. It's not. It's going there, right? Like for the most part, it's not coming here. So when we're talking about that, this is how China gets around its dependence on, for instance, Iranian or Venezuelan oil. But the fact is, so kind of tell us what you're looking for out of that conversation between the two different sides, between President Trump and President Xi later this week.
I think you touched on in your prior question. AI needs energy, and energy needs lots of sources of growth. America over the last couple decades really showed what it could do with science, with risk-taking, with risk capital by fracking, science of deep water drilling. All of those things really made America a leader both in natural gas production globally and in oil production globally. What one saw in China, which lacked certain oil and gas natural resources, they pushed other directions toward an electric state. And when you see that happening, it's almost like they were, I don't say forced, but they chose that path, which was a manufacturing-heavy path because of the lack of oil and natural gas resources. That is a shadow to China what it was decades ago. While it's still important for Chinese in terms of macroeconomics, in terms of imports from the Middle East, imports from Russia, it's a fraction. So I think energy policy really, from a Chinese perspective, has changed over decades toward an electrification state, and that kind of dovetails very, very well with a hyperscaler or AI.
So now another big thing about the AI future, if you will, and this is bigger than just AI, this is any electronics, this is semiconductor chips. From what I understand, the stuff that goes into making your guys' solar panels is very similar to the stuff that goes into making the chips. We've talked about this in the past. Talk to us about how building out what you guys are trying to do may in effect actually also help the U.S. produce these chips that we need to produce that we don't produce in America right now.
So the solar industry starts with polysilicon, goes to ingots and wafers, those become cells. Cells go into two pieces of glass, become the panel or the module. When you look at that chain, we purchase our polysilicon from Hemlock Semiconductor in Michigan, which is majority owned by Corning. We'll be purchasing our wafers, our solar wafers, from Corning itself, and then feed that through, so have an entire chain. When you think of that chain, particularly in the beginning part of polysilicon and wafers, when you go to extremely high grades, that's feeding the wafers for the semiconductor industry. So in some ways, the solar industry is like the proverbial cow, and semiconductors are that choice piece of meat that one would want, that you really can't support a large silicon-based industry without having those precursors. And it's important that America also competes in a silicon age versus an oil age. Silicon's critical, and solar is its own part, from process equipment engineers to different processes on the polysilicon side, the wafer side. All of those parts are important.
So another thing that we're talking about here, and we were talking to Nathan Leamer about this, and then again Senator McCormack, is this whole idea of what we're seeing happen is a lot more manufacturing getting built in America, different facilities, et cetera. There's all sorts of different new exciting things happening on the horizon. You guys are just no exception to this rule. You guys are a big, you're building multiple facilities, I think, down in Texas. Talk to us a little bit about the boom in manufacturing that we're seeing, what role you guys are playing in this. How does this play out down in Texas?
Yeah, we're building a 2.1 gigawatts solar cell factory north of Austin in Rockdale. It's at the site of an old Alcoa smelter. That's a legacy place that used to employ lots of people and had lots of legacy power access to the grid. Now we have a new fab there that will employ over 1,200 people, have good advanced manufacturing jobs. The building point also that Senator McCormack touched on, I think, is critical, that America needs to learn how to build again. When we think of the process or the OpEx of our industry for solar, a lot of it is electricity, water, and gases. America can be extraordinarily competitive on that OpEx. On the CapEx side, it struggles. Things may cost 2 to 3 times as much to build and take 2 to 3 times at least longer in terms of time. All that time is money. I think there has to be a very strong look at how we build. It doesn't mean we disregard clean air or clean water or environmental impacts on animals and species. We can do all of that and protect all of that while simultaneously building. For example, in the oil and gas industry where I worked for a very long time, there are many, many waivers and grandfathered parts from OSHA to EPA to National Fire Protection Act to building codes to wastewater. All of those things apply and can accelerate. And I think they contributed to the speed at which America could build oil and gas. I think America needs to transfer some of that, particularly like National Fire Protection Act. We don't want our factories burning, but we understand. But some of these codes are just done the wrong way, and they create a lot of capital costs and time and permits that just slows us down to build. You got to wonder why everyone else in the world can build so much faster, and their factories aren't on fire, and ours, are so slow. So we do have to think about how to build faster.
All right, well, Dan Barcelo from T1 Energy, sir, thank you for sponsoring here, and thank you for the great conversation. Folks, I think we're going to take a few minutes break, so if everybody wants to go grab a coffee, whatever you guys need to do, we'll be back up here with Secretary Bergum in just a few minutes. So we'll be right back. All right, thanks.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you guys could take your seats, we're going to get started in a couple minutes here. Everybody there? All right, if everybody could take their seats, please. Welcome back. We want to welcome Secretary of the Interior and the Chairman of the National Energy Dominance Council, Mr. Doug Burgum, and Matt Boyle, our Washington Bureau Chief. Come on up, guys.
Mr. Secretary, really want to thank you for doing this. We have a great crowd that comes to all of these events that we've been doing, but just for a point of historical reference, Secretary Bergum was the first Breitbart event that we ever did here in Washington, D.C., right here in this room, on this stage. We did it a little over a year ago. We've had a great, successful series since then. So, Mr. Secretary, really thank you for taking the time to join us here and talk about energy dominance policy. So lots to talk about here, but the big topic du jour, if you will, today is, of course, energy dominance, which you're the chair of the President's National Energy Dominance Council, and how it connects together with the future of artificial intelligence. So talk to us about that. Let's start really broad. How important is it that we are energy dominant as we enter this future of AI?
Well, obviously it's critically important, Matt, and I want to say, first of all, thanks to you and thanks to Breitbart for having me back. Thanks for holding these important series. Fun to be the first one to be second at bat here, almost a year later, but great programming. I would say, there was a shift in the world towards energy that was being pushed by certain elements, which we can talk in more depth later, but it was like, oh, we need to transition, and transition meant we're going to move from one form of energy to another, and the transition was always a fantasy. Even stronger, you could call it a lie, because if you're going to go from affordable, reliable, and secure energy to intermittent, weather-dependent, foreign-sourced, it was not reliable, not dependable, not affordable, and not secure. It was none of the other things. And then that transition, when you go from something that's 7 by 24 base load to intermittent, then that's actually energy subtraction. And any countries and any states that pursued by policy or by legislation to aggressively go down a transition, energy transition was the buzzword. If you were going to do that, you ended up with higher prices. That's all just a fact. It's not an assertion. It's a fact. In most cases, the states that did that have about a 50% minimum higher energy cost pursuing that, because, again, you were reducing the supply, and then you needed to maintain all of the stuff you had before for those times when the sun wasn't shining, the wind wasn't blowing. So along comes President Trump, and it's a complete 180 in direction from where the world was heading and where many states, the United States, was heading. And that was moving towards energy dominance. Meant that we're going to have enough energy for ourselves, for affordability, reliable, affordable, and secure energy, and that we're going to have enough energy to sell to our friends and allies so they don't have to buy from our adversaries. Who would our adversaries be? People that are waging war in Eastern Europe, people that are funding 24 terror groups, so specifically Russia and Iran, supplying lots of energy to the world. So can we displace that? We've displaced about 2/3 of the Russian gas in Europe with U.S. LNG exports. 16 months ago, when President Trump took office, there was a ban on building LNG export facilities in America. Now America, world's largest LNG exporter. U.S. is the world's largest oil producer and the world's largest natural gas producer, and not by a little bit, by a lot of it in terms of this. So unleashing American energy is all about having prosperity at home and having peace abroad. And then to close this out, Matt, I would say again, the transition on energy that was being sold to the world and often being funded by those countries that are actually producing hydrocarbons, the dark money that was coming in to try to convince people to transition to this energy subtraction policy. We're saying, well, it's an existential threat. I think everybody saw that in every article. It's an existential threat. If I say existential threat, people, I'm sure in certain generations in America would automatically think, oh, they're talking about this thing called climate change. Which was unassailable. You couldn't question it. Science is about questioning the hypothesis, but if anybody questioned that particular narrow element, which was based on computer models and not really based in deep science, in the computer models that project things out 75 or 80 years in the future, have flaws. I mean, I was a software guy. I mean, I never saw a model in our industry that was accurate for 10 years out, much less 80 years out, even the best modeling. So then if you say the existential threat was climate change, under the Trump administration, it was really like there was two things that go back to your question. Took me a long time to get there, but here I am. How important are these?
Though.
Well, the two existential threats that the Trump administration was facing was Iran having a nuclear weapon and China winning the AI arms race. And guess what? Both of those require the strategy of energy dominance. That's why President Trump declared an energy emergency on the first day. That's why he created an Energy Dominance Council, which is about half the cabinet, working across the whole range of things from critical minerals to electricity production to oil and gas production to policy and regulations to tariffs to sanctions. All the tools that we need to achieve energy dominance, all of those are represented on the council with, Lutnick, Bessent, Wright, EPA, Brooke Rollins in USDA on the ag, on the biofuel side. We're all in it together. We're all working across this whole thing. But that's the thing. That's what we're addressing. And I would say the progress in the first 16 months has been remarkable across all of these fronts, but a lot of work to do and a lot of change, a lot of challenges, a lot of headwinds from, again, coming from foreign sources and others, but that's what we're here to talk about today.
Okay, so now when we were here last year, we talked about the 4 babies, right? This is how you get to the energy dominance. The 4 babies are drill, baby, drill, of course, everybody knows that one. But map, baby, map, mine, baby, mine, and build, baby, build. Where do we stand with regard to this stuff? Can you lay out what you've done and what the president has done and what the administration has done, the Energy Dominance Council, over this 16 months since President Trump's been back in the White House?
Well, on the drill, baby, drill, record oil production, that's the best measure of that. But I do want to say that what we inherited in places, just like in one district in the Bureau of Land Management in New Mexico, the Carlsbad district, had 5,600 unprocessed applications for permit to drill that we inherited. And that's just not like, oh, it's poor management. That was essentially trying to not follow the law. The law says that on these public lands that we will hold quarterly lease sales, that the quarterly lease sales are available to the public to buy a lease. A private sector company writes a check to America for the opportunity to develop. And when they're developing it in line. They have to follow all the EPA rules at the state and federal and local level. This is not like destruction. This is wealth generating activity for America and for Americans. And so once they have the lease, they've won the lease auction. Now they apply for a permit to drill. So they've written us a check, but now we're going to slow roll the application to drill. 5,600 of those not being processed. We've knocked those down by 91%. Record number processed, record number of new permits, and it's like, oh, you guys must be really, pro energy. Yes, we are. We're also pro following the law, and we're also pro customer service, which is if someone is writing us a check, they're the customer, us is America, the customer, and then when they start producing in those wells, you know what they do? They pay royalties to all of you, to us. They pay royalties to us. In 1 year, we've taken the Department of Interior to an organization after 4 years of declining revenue. It's now this year we will produce more revenue than we expend. And what does that mean? That's good things for our land. It's good thing for conservation, for wildlife, for our national parks. Because if America, the 500 million acres of land, the 700 million acres of subsurface, and the 3 billion of offshore that are all part of the Department of Interior, the most misnamed bureau or department in government, Interior, because it covers 14 time zones. There's not much interior about interior. But in that, we're doing what we should do, because these lands were put away for the benefit and the use of the American people. And there are things that we protect exclusively: wilderness areas, national parks, wildlife refuges. Those are completely off limits. But the other piece, which is like 90% of it, was put away for the benefit and the use of the American people. And that means that we've got to not just drill, baby, drill, but we've also have to map, baby, map, because the mapping leads the exploration. And we've had some incredible mapping successes. One that just got reported last week. In Appalachia, there was a find that looks like we could have 300 years equivalent of the lithium that we import from foreign countries right here in the United States that could be easily accessible. Didn't even know it was there because, again, in past administrations, well, when you're going to transition, part of the transition lie was, oh, we don't need to do mining anymore. We don't need to do anything anymore in America. And we killed the mining industry just like we killed the forest industry, just like we tried to kill grazing, all of these things that are beneficial to not just from a revenue standpoint, but good for habitat. So great progress getting the USGS, which is part of U.S. Geologic Survey, part of Interior, back on track. They're back mapping like crazy. And then we are getting mining going, but what a mining disaster we've had. We'll graduate 36,000 lawyers in America this year. We'll graduate about 300 mining and metallurgical candidates. And that is, so if you know anybody that wants to have a surefire long-term career, in a place where everybody that's in that field is retiring because they're all baby boomers, is go into that. I visited, I think, 3 or 4 of the 17 remaining mining schools in America, and they got some fabulous programs going on, amazing technology. It's not what you think of in some old movie of hard rock mining. I mean, this is high tech capability. But then I'll meet a senior and they'll be amazing and they'll have 10 job offers and they'll be like, how many's in your class? And they'll say like 18, at one of, like I said, less than 2 dozen schools. So anyway, making progress trying to revive that because we've got a huge exposure to China on critical minerals. And so again, across the front, we feel like we're making progress on all these, but a lot of way to go.
Okay, so you mentioned Iran earlier.
And I left off Build Baby Build because I hope we're going to talk about AI.
We're going to it. Believe me, it's on the list.
Okay,
so,
good. So
we have a list.
So I'm saving Build Baby Build.
Yeah, we're going to get to that. But I want to talk a little bit more about energy prices and whatnot. People are rightfully upset about high gas prices, but I get it that the fact that, well, first off, I would argue too that if all the things that you guys haven't done weren't done, and we ended up in this war with Iran, and Iran had closed the Strait of Hormuz, which is where we're at. The fact is that it would be a lot worse than it is right now. But that being said, it's worth noting, too, that none of the oil that comes out of the Strait of Hormuz is coming to America because the other Gulf, the Gulf of America, is where all the ships are, and we're taking the energy and shipping it around the world because of the policy. We're becoming a net energy exporter now. But the fact is that can you kind of give us a sense of where you think things are going here? I've talked to a number of different world leaders over the last few weeks, the Greek Prime Minister, the Deputy Prime Minister of Kurdistan in Iraq. They've all said that they have a lot of confidence in President Trump as he negotiates a deal here with the Iranians. Do you expect this situation to resolve itself soon, and how is that going to affect energy prices?
Well, let me pull back from that specifically and just sort of say that for those of you that are reporting or thinking, I think that there's a lot of reporting every day about, what's the price today, what's the price today, what's the price going to be tomorrow, missing the big picture. Again, under President Trump's leadership, there's been just this massive shift that has occurred, and we don't talk about Venezuela, but Venezuela, I know we set expectations high, which is that we can take a sanctioned adversary and turn them into a strategic ally in 45 minutes. We had some heroic pilots that were injured, but that we can basically win a war with no deaths in 45 minutes. That's the new standard. And of course, let's just say that's a remarkable thing. And of course, Venezuela, world's largest oil petroleum reserves, larger than Saudi Arabia. Originally, all of their production was coming to the U.S., coming to Gulf of America coast refineries. Great synergies between these two countries. And having been down there and seen what's going on, have had team members that have down there as recently as last week as part of the first American Airlines direct flights between Miami and Caracas reestablished, and watching the enthusiasm of the people, watching the fact that now for the first time in all these decades that there's a glimpse of hope. When I had a chance we were at the Palacio Miraflores, which is essentially their White House and their palace, to walk out with Delcy Rodriguez, down the red carpet to talk to some press. And as we were walking out, she actually under her breath said, "Oh my God," and it was a positive "Oh my God" because there was like all of you. There was like hundreds of people standing there, and this is a place where they've been closed to the Venezuelan free press for decades. But now it was being opened, and there was an American flag next to a Venezuelan flag, and we were basically holding a press conference, and there was many people there that were shooting video of that had it'd be like you're on the White House press corps, but you have not been allowed in the White House for 25 years, not even on the White House grounds for 25 years. That was like a reopening, And so it's an exciting opportunity in terms of, because this is a country that follows the NBA and Major League Baseball, and I mean this is a Western Hemisphere aligned, and a lot of the the expats that left Venezuela are working for American companies. One of the companies that was with us that was going back down to Venezuela has 600 Venezuelans working for him in Houston, most of them petroleum engineers or mining engineers. So this is a big story which has been lost, because essentially with that move, plus the development of the U.S. resources, plus what's going on in Alaska, we have moved the geopolitical center of oil and energy has moved from the Middle East to the Western Hemisphere. And I don't know anybody who's written that story, but that has actually happened. And that's why when you talk about, Matt, boats lining up in Texas and us, I mean, the reason why prices around the world are closer to $100 versus $200, for a barrel of oil, is because of the United States and because of what we're doing in terms of the massive exports that we're doing. So this has shifted. The war in Iran, I'm going to say with the country of Iran in some way is over. What we're reduced to now is the IRGC is basically, they're a sanctioned terrorist group which is holding their own country hostage, and they're trying to hold a piece of geography hostage called the Strait. And once freedom of navigation occurs in the Strait, and all of the barrels that can flow from Bahrain and Kuwait and Qatar and UAE and Saudi starts flowing freely again, we're going to have a dramatic drop in prices. That's going to happen. So it isn't really about, they keep blaming the war. What we ought to focus on is that in the same way the Houthis were trying to control the Red Sea for a while, we've got basically piracy still alive in 2026 in this planet. And it's, interesting to me that all of the nations that actually really are depending on it aren't willing to stand up for freedom of navigation, because it isn't really about a war against a country. It's about stopping a terrorist group who is going to have a nuclear weapon. That's been halted, but now they're trying to use their projection of terror to be able to disrupt commercial traffic. And so that's the piece that's the piece that I know is going to be solvable. And so I'm very optimistic that this is going to end well. And when it does, with all of the hand-wringing that went on, people are going to wake up and go, wow, we moved in less than 2 years the geopolitical center to the Western Hemisphere, and all of these things that have been 47 years and all the fears around OPEC and energy crises and whatever, that's going to be all behind us, and we will truly be entering into an era of energy independence. And of course, with the supply chains being the most secure in the U.S., and people look at that, where do people want to build AI? Where do people want to build advanced manufacturing? Where do people want to invest? They want to invest in the U.S. That's why, in spite of, there's all these, again, hand-wringing reports, but then, but we at the same time, we've got record stock market results and record investment and really solid job reports, because underneath all this, we've got an economy that's just ready to have some breakout like we haven't seen before.
So you mentioned both Venezuela and Iran, what we're seeing happen in both places. In addition to that, so I mean, those would be the adversary situation. I guess Venezuela not so much anymore. But those would be the adversary situations where we've used the power of American energy to achieve our objectives, and we're still working on it with Iran. But there are also our friends around the world, where President Trump, you mentioned as well, Europe. And I believe we've got several European officials here today. The EU ambassador to the U.S. is here in the room. I know there's senior Greek officials as well. I know you've been to Greece multiple times over the last year. They're doing drill, baby, drill in Greece. Like, they're about to start doing the explorations off the coast of multiple islands for natural gas early next year. But the fact is that we've been also through the vertical corridor there shipping natural gas over to Greece, up into Eastern Europe, to Ukraine, to cut off the Russians and stop the flow of the Russian natural gas and oil into Europe. So talk to us a little bit about how President Trump has used American energy dominance as a diplomatic tool, both with our adversaries and with our friends and allies around the world, because I think that if it's not his trademark move, it's one of his trademark moves about how he has used American energy dominance to achieve American objectives on the world stage.
Well, I'm just smiling, Matt, because I'm so happy that you understand at a depth about the vertical corridor and what's going on there, because this is another one of these great changes that's occurring. Essentially, the quick primer is that all the infrastructure for natural gas in Europe flows from Russia to, into Western Europe, and of course, I think naively, and again, I would encourage everybody in the room to look hard when you think there's organic protests around things like climate or natural gas pipelines or AI data centers. If you think that stuff's all organic and all local, it's just not. It hasn't been. Take Germany, which shut down all their nuclear plants and shut down all their coal plants. And in a multi-party country like Germany, all you need to do is swing the Green Party, and if you swing 10% of the votes, then they influence and say, oh, when we form this coalition government, we will join you, and then we'll all be in the majority together. What will it take for you to join us, Green Party? Well, you have to agree to shut down all the nuclear and shut down, all the coal. Well, then they do that, and then this year, when they have you've got a winter after they've shut it down, so that in their own green dream, Germany spent $500 billion, so that's $500 billion on their green dream, and they produce 20% less electricity. It costs 30% more than it did before, and they're deindustrializing. You're not going to build advanced manufacturing, requires more electricity. You're not going to build an AI manufacturing plant. I wouldn't call them a data center. I'd call them, you're actually manufacturing intelligence for the first time. You could turn electricity, turn it into light, like these bright lights that are facing us here.
They're very bright, by the way.
That's right. And heat. I mean, that's a miracle. I mean, thank you, Edison, Tesla, Benjamin Franklin. I mean, thank you for harnessing electricity. But now, for the first time in our lifetimes in history, human history, you can convert electricity into intelligence. That changes everything. And it requires more. It requires energy addition, not energy subtraction. But no one's going to go to a place to build that manufacturing where you have high prices. So Germany this year, they actually invented a new word. I wish I could pronounce it. It's German. It's about this long and has 2 vowels and 18 consonants. But it means dark doldrums. It means the sun didn't shine as much. It was cloudier than we thought, and the wind didn't blow. There are German green energy companies that missed their earnings, which is a bizarre thing to me, having been a chairman, CEO, or corporate officer of public companies for over 20 years, including right up to the day before I became governor. I mean, the idea that I would have been part of a group saying, we got to put out a press release, we missed earnings, and we're going to blame it on the weather. I mean, but that's what it's like, no, we're blaming it on this dark doldrum thing. So they literally had groups that weren't producing as much energy as they forecasted it, and they missed their earnings calls because of weather. So then, of course, this happened when they're not producing much electricity. Where is Germany getting its electrons? Well, they were buying electrons from French nuclear 30 miles from the German border, and they were buying electrons for electricity to run their country from Polish coal plants. So it is like the whole thing is a folly when you look at it, and accomplishes nothing and puts the thing. But this, you know who is behind some of that Green Party recruiting? Russia. Russia psyops. Russia's like convincing everybody like, oh, go do this green thing, and we have a solution. Buy natural gas from us. So all the pipelines coming from Russia, coming in there. So what Matt referenced, which I think you're the first person that's interviewed me that actually understands what the vertical corridor is, which is we have an opportunity with U.S. natural gas to go up from Greece and Croatia, down from Poland. Who's in the middle? Ukraine. Ukraine's got massive underground storage capability for natural gas. They can store like a winter's worth of natural gas. We could be filling it up all summer when natural gas prices are low. And of course, as you mentioned, I've been over there multiple times. Chris Wright's been there multiple times. He just got back from another conference. Between the two of us, if you're going to say, of all the energy ministers in Europe, and we've met with them all, which are the ones that are the biggest fans of the U.S., they're the ones that are captive to having to buy Russian gas. They'd be like, we'd love to buy American natural gas. I visited a new offloading facility in Greece. They'd received 35 shipments of U.S. LNG, 35 shipments total. 31 of them had come from the United States. One of those shipments, one ship, would heat 200,000 German homes for a year. So it was, a week's worth into that facility was enough natural gas to run all of Greece. And so the quantities at which we're able to produce and ship and transfer this stuff, I mean, it's really remarkable when we talk about changing the geopolitics. And again, it's back to that selling energy to our friends and allies so they don't have to buy from our adversaries.
Okay, so the other major thing that we were talking about, and you mentioned this earlier, that the reason why we need to have national energy dominance is to fuel the AI future and to beat China, frankly. I mean, because either they're going to set the tone or we're going to set the terms, right? And President Trump is headed there later this week. He's going to meet with President Xi. It's the first of possibly as many as 4 major meetings between the two world leaders, between the President of the United States and the President of China over the course of just this year. The President's obviously offered to President Xi to come here for a state visit and later in the year. And then there's the G20 meeting in December, and I think there's another meeting in China in November. So the fact is that I would imagine that AI is a conversation, a topic point of conversation. I've got here printed out the National Policy Framework for Artificial Intelligence from March from the White House. It's a 4-page document. I recommend everybody read it. But in it, the Trump administration, the White House, lays out how do we win this thing and what are the framework that we need to have. What say you, and what are some of the things you're looking to see from President Trump as he visits China in this battle between the two nations, about which one is going to control the future of AI?
This is a critical battle of our times, and before I jump into that, I would say it's great that you've got the report here. But I would say again, another story that I feel has been missed is someone said, "Oh, what, are we going to have? Are we going to have an election, that gets influenced by artificial intelligence?" And I said, "We already had one." They said, "Which one?" I said, "When President Trump, got elected, in November of 2024. We got elected in November of 24. Who was standing on stage at the inauguration? Tim Cook, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg. I mean, Silicon Valley titans were all standing there within 20 feet of the president. Why? Because they all got behind electing a president that understood that we needed more energy and that we could not win the AI arms race without more electricity, and that the policies that the competition was offering was going to end up with energy subtraction. So they overcame all other concerns they had and said, this is what has to happen. And that's why you saw this giant shift occur. And I don't think it ever really got covered, but I was there in the middle of it when it was happening and understood it was happening. And it was important that it was happening, because if we were going down a path which was continuing to do energy subtraction, we have no chance. Now we have a chance. But against China, they're effectively what we would in Russia would call the Politburo, but their top 15 people in China are all got engineering backgrounds, and they're not spending years caught up in court in litigation over a bunch of I would say bureaucratic rules, not even laws. I mean, even in Interior, as we go back and release the rules around NEPA, we went through the NEPA rules and found that 80% of what people were being held accountable for was never in the original law. We've put it all in an appendix. If you want to go through NEPA right now on a DOI property, you're going to focus on the 20% that's actually in the law. And we've taken some of these things like an EA or an EIS, which would take years to do, and then litigation, you could double them. And we did an EA in 12 days. We didn't cut any corners. We did an EIS in 24 days. These take 2 years. It's like, how is that possible? You must be cutting corners. No, it was all like, oh, I'm going to send it to Matt, and Matt get back to me in 30 days, and then Matt sends it to John for 30 days. That's what a government business process looks like, is emailing around documents. And I've even found, since I've been in this, there was some of this permitting issue in the Permian. Some of it was still being done on paper. It's 2026, folks. I mean, some of these things were solved 30 years ago in the private sector or longer. So getting the speed, but China goes fast, and China can deploy their capital. They don't have to worry about the permitting issue, and they have completely closed themselves off to the whole energy transition. fantasy that was going on. China added 93 gigawatts of coal a year ago, and they're on track to add about the same amount again this year. Okay, all we were doing with coal was shutting it down prematurely. We forced through a bunch of things this winter and coal. If there's a coal plant running in America, rest assured it's clean. It's gone through 25 years of assault, and they've cleaned everything out. If you see anything that looks like coming out of a coal plant stack, it's steam. I know that we had coal plants in our state. They passed the most rigorous tests, more rigorous than any other industrial site. The attack on coal was so great. But we kept 17 gigawatts. We, the Trump administration, 17 gigawatts alive this winter. And if they hadn't been kept alive this winter during that Storm Fern, which is a cold snap across 22 states, we would have had tens and twenties of millions of people without power, not for like a few hours, like for days or a week. When Uri hit Texas a few years ago, there was a couple hundred people that died during that cold snap, and they had an economic catastrophe down there. We averted one here because of keeping that going. But China is just adding to their electricity, and that is so our models can be faster, Matt. Our software can be better. Our chips can be better. But they can run their models longer because they've got all this power. So I don't worry about us not having technological leadership. I worry about us on the build, baby, build, because we're still running into this thing where there are some states that literally are passing bans on AI data centers. And it's not organic and local. Some of this is foreign source dark money coming in, and the people that used to fight on climate change have shifted. They don't talk climate change because they realize it's a losing argument. I can't get people excited about 1 degree of climate change, but man, I can lie to them about why their electric bill went up. And I say lie because there are elections occurring in states right now where people are running on the affordability of electricity, and there's never been a data center built in their state, and there won't be a data center because these data centers are not going to go to places where you've got 2 to 3 times higher electricity. 100 years ago, you wouldn't have put a wheat mill someplace where there was no water, no power, and the wheat cost 3 times as much. Why would you do that? So these arguments are specious. And then in my own state, when I was still governor, we put a $1.2 billion data center in a town of 800 people. You know what happened to the electric rates? They went down. You're like, that's impossible. That's impossible. When you bring in AI, the rates go up because they use so much power. No, we brought them in. And it's a fixed cost, the thing called the grid. You bring in a new customer who's willing to pay a premium, and they bought down the rates for all the 800 local farmers, ranchers, and small town folks that had a meter. They bought it all down. And then the townspeople said, yeah, but what about housing? They're going to come in our little town. They're going to drive all the housing up. And the people building the data center for $1.2 billion, which is more than the entire tax base of the entire county, said, oh, well, we'll build 30 new single-family homes, is that okay? And then they're like, do you need any special breaks or free land? No, we'll just do it. They just did all that stuff. And then I asked them when as governor, I said, did you ask anything of the data center builders that they said no to? And they said no. I said, well, they said, why? I said, because you didn't ask enough. You should have asked for a new gym and new uniforms and new everything, because it's like there's so much money to be made in manufacturing intelligence. And so there are ways to make this work, and there's ways around the country where it is working. And it's not voodoo economics, and it's not subsidies. It's you take a fixed cost grid, then you add a new customer payer on there. Because most of the time, like on that peak moments during Fern when we were redlining and we almost were out of it, during those moments, wind and solar were providing 2% of the power in those in New England and across those states that were at risk, 2%. Okay, some of those New England places still burn wood, and some of them burn trash and municipal stuff. Trash and wood was 3% of the electricity. And that's just a fact. So trash and wood outperformed wind and solar by 50% at the time we needed us most. Oil flexed up by 50%. Gas flexed up by 50%. Coal flexed up by more than 50%. Nuclear was 11% before the storm, during the storm, and after the storm. Rock solid, beautiful, no emissions, but there's no dial. You can't turn it up. You can't crank it up and make it go. But when the wind stops and the sun goes down, something else has got to come on, and that's part of the physics of the grid. And you can't just shift to this all weather-dependent stuff and expect it to work without a big increase in cost. So we are, so your question here, you can tell that I'm anxious about this, which is I'm anxious that we're winning the tech battle, but we're losing the build electricity battle because America doesn't understand yet the importance of this, and we also don't understand. We also have so many ways to stop building things in America. We've become a country that's very good at legally trying to stop stuff as opposed to getting stuff done.
Okay, so Mr. Secretary, I'm going to try to pack a lot into this next question. So,
Unlike the other ones.
Specifically, so you mentioned the issues that we're running into in various states, where you've got this state doing this thing and that state doing that thing. What we have here again is a national policy framework, and I would imagine that the hope from the president and from the administration is that we get to a broader national framework put into place, ideally with Congress's input and whatnot, so that way you don't have 50 different states setting 50 different rules and dragging, California dragging us to crazy leftist land and Gavin Newsom crazy town. But then at the same time, when we're talking about this build baby build thing, there's a lot of people out there that are rightfully concerned about the economic impacts of the future of AI and what that's going to do to jobs. So, but we've been talking here about how there's been a big shift as in the places that have embraced AI to skilled labor, away from some of the the learn to code crowd. But then in addition to that, as you mentioned, the energy prices. The president had rolled out at the State of the Union address the Ratepayer Protection Pledge to make sure that the tech companies that are doing these data centers or other AI things are going to make sure that they take on the cost of the electricity. So can you address all of those points in this last big question here? Because I know there's a lot to unpack, but those are some of the major concerns as we go forward.
Well, great stuff, Matt. On the Ratepayer Protection Plan, it's a simple concept, which is, if you're one of the hyperscalers and if you want to build out a data center, then you have to, I say BYOP, you got to bring your own power, or if you don't want to bring your own power, you have to be willing to allow yourself to be curtailed. You have to be willing during those peak moments, hours, days of the year to say, yeah, you can shut my center off. And you say, well, that's not possible. It's not possible in some forms of AI, but if you're just doing a training model, then you could say, yeah, we're willing over a course of 365 days to be shut down 24 hours. We can be curtailed. If somebody says yes to that, there's a lot of places you can go in the country where we actually have excess power. The spring and the fall, we generate hundreds of gigawatts more power than what we use. So all the grid operators are trying to make sure that on those peak cold days and peak warm days that we can still keep everything running and not have the cascading collapse on this giant machine called the grid. So there's that. But if you also want to build your own power, you can do that. So now we've got utility providers, and having been in tech for virtually my what I call my business career, not my growing up in agriculture with no tech, small town thing. But what a lot of people, when we got in that 30 years I was in tech, we used about 1% of the electricity in America, and never more. Even though more devices, more everything. I mean, PCs were getting more efficient, and everything that the transistors were going into, refrigerators, everything was getting more and more efficient. So technology was using less, but now technology is gobbling it up and creating a real demand curve. So then if you're a CEO, that's running a utility and you've been in that industry for 30 or 35 years and you're finally the CEO, you could have gone your whole career and never seen a demand curve like we're seeing right now. And if they're regulated by the state on a guaranteed return, they don't know, they've never responded to building quickly. So then along comes the tech companies, and when I was at, for 7 years as a corporate officer of one of those companies, I never went to a CapEx meeting, and I was like, I saw the CFO, and I'm like, Greg, did I not get invited to the thing? There was only like 10 corporate officers, and we had 90,000 people working there. Was somehow I excluded? And he goes, no, we never had CapEx meetings. And I thought about it. I'm like, right, because we only hired salespeople and software developers, and if we needed a new office in Singapore or Munich, we leased it. There was literally some of the highest market cap companies in the country were not spending capital expenditures on a year-to-year basis. What was their number for this year? Just the 5 biggest ones in the country, $400 billion. $400 billion in CapEx from the hyperscalers. That was That's bigger than automotive plus advanced manufacturing plus mining combined. I mean, it's like bigger than all these other industries. And then publicly, some of those in that group have said that next year they're going from 90 billion to 180 billion. So as a group, they could have 800 billion of CapEx. So the amount of dollars that are going to be spent, why am I going through these numbers? Because the states that are banning AI aren't looking at that. They're saying, we don't want it because we're worried about next fall's election, we're worried about electric. Instead of solving for how to have lower electric rates, like pursuing less of the green dream, because, you know, building a natural gas pipeline into New York, 135 miles long, the Constitution Pipeline, the estimate is, and we've been talking to all the governors and all the regulators trying to get this thing done for the last 15 months, it would have saved like $8 billion for people in New England this winter alone versus what they were paying. Natural gas was $3 in Pennsylvania, and during the storm it was $20 in parts of New England. It was coming in by ship or coming in from Canada. I mean, it's like, you know, there's people would kill to be next. I mean, from an energy standpoint, to be next to Pennsylvania with some of the most abundant natural gas, but we've got this thing called New England, which is as bad as California in some ways. 20% of the U.S. population, the estimate now is they will get 2% of this CapEx I'm talking about. So any of you that are like, oh, I want to look at markets and look ahead, I'll give you a tip. You know, short any place that's got high electricity places, because they are not going to get their fair share or even a shot at the next biggest wave of CapEx. Because when you have when AI manufacturing comes into a state, the thing that's going to follow is all the people that want to do advanced manufacturing that also need that AI. And then we take a look at people say AI, you threw in your question, multi-part question about what's it going to do to the economy and jobs. What are the two things we've subsidized the most in this country in the last 25 years? What are the two things that have had higher rates of inflation than the general rate of inflation for 25 years? Healthcare and education. The two things that the federal government seems to never be able to solve, but also wants to throw money at all the time, whether it's in the form of loans or grants or et cetera. And then what are the two things that we, even though we were throwing money at higher ed for 25 years, and they were the ones that were supposed to produce them, we were always short about 300,000 to 500,000 programmers. Every year there'd be a report. We need more programmers. Okay. Higher ed never delivered. You know what's delivering now to solve the shortage in software developers? AI. The AI that's out right now writes better than like 90 or 95%. Some say some of the new models writes better than 99% of the coders that are out there. So we've solved that problem, so that's amazing. And then people say, well, AI, well, what's it going to do? It's going to take my job. No, AI might, the standard answer was AI is going to cure cancer. And people say, yeah, sure, but that's 10 years from now. Last Friday, check it out, there was a report, the Mayo Clinic took AI, they took all the scans of all the people who later died of pancreatic cancer and said, when did we take scans of those people before we detected it? Let's take a look at all their clean scans. Because everybody I know that died of pancreatic cancer was like, oh, they found out they had pancreatic cancer. What stage is it? What stage is it always? 4, right? You guys know the answer. America knows the answer. It's like, wow, it was a death sentence. If you had pancreatic, I've never met someone who had stage 1 pancreatic cancer. It's like wasn't a thing. Well, now Mayo looks at all of these things. Arguably, some of the best radiologists, human radiologists in the world work for Mayo. Now AI goes and looks at hundreds of thousands of these scans of people that were undetectable, and they think they now have, AI has figured out a way to figure out those discrepancies, to identify early on who's got an indicator, who's got a marker, who's going to end up with pancreatic cancer, and we can treat it maybe even before it gets to stage 1. So we may have cured cancer on pancreatic cancer, one of the biggest killers, last Friday, and nobody noticed. And we'll have more and more announcements like this. And then back at Interior, the same within the same couple of days, we're pushing and pushing because, of course, we want to have Interior be the leader in adopting AI. We want to have the leader in process improvement. We want to get rid of these mind-numbing jobs with the paper and the old systems. I mean, to get a permit done in that Carlsbad thing, I flew out there and was meeting with them. They have to touch 14 different archaic systems to get one permit done. It's a miracle of human effort that they got it down to, the 5,600 permits down, but it wasn't because we gave them an AI solution. These people were working really hard. Now we have to come in with the right kind of business process improvements. But there was a different thing. It was a project that was bid in the last administration, 12 programmers for 2 years, so 24 man years, an outside consulting firm, $3 million estimate, which means that they wouldn't have been working full-time on us. They'd have been working on other stuff as well, but that was some consultant was throwing out that number. And then we had a guy went home on a Sunday afternoon. He's got a new baby. He's trying to help the new mom out. It's their first child. He's like, hey, I'll do the laundry. He shrinks her clothes because he's not paying attention, because he's working, helping out with the baby. And then he sets up a query to write this piece of code, for a logon thing, which was supposed to take 12 people 2 years. And in 4 hours, it writes a perfect piece of code for $4,000 in tokens. So, humans can't grok the fact that we can do things now like 700 times better. I mean, people lost the script during Moore's Law when it was 2 times faster every 18 months. I watched companies disappear. So did you, Kodak. I mean, it's only 2 times faster every 18 months. They couldn't keep up with the curve. Now we have something that shows up that even if you've been in tech your whole life, you look at it and go, how is it possible that this thing wrote that piece of code and it's perfect? And if you go, well, it may not be perfect, well, then you go have it spend a couple more hours QCing itself, because it'll do that for you too. And then it's like, yeah, but it's going to be hard for people to use it. Okay, write me the documentation, but make sure it's in 27 languages. And it'll do that. And now you've gone from 4 hours to 8 hours? I mean, the miracle of what's happening right now is incredible. So this goes back to we cannot lose this AI arms race. And to do that, we need power and we need to build stuff. And if some states don't want to build the stuff, other states will benefit. I'll close with saying one of the hyperscalers talked to me last week. They have $25 billion of projects going on in a southern state. And in that southern state, they're embraced at the local school district, the county level, the township level. They're at the state, the governor's level. Everybody loves them. And when I was a governor, if you could get $25 billion of investment coming to your state, I mean, a big prize would have been a $10 billion auto plant. But $25 billion of something that's clean. Oh, and by the way, this whole thing about it uses a bunch of water, check that out. Write that story. That's just a bunch of bunk. Most of these things have got closed loop systems. I mean, I don't even know where the water thing came from. These are not, if it's a big water user, if you find someone who's a big water user, then let me know, because, 2 things are wrong. Either they don't have the latest technology or they're building in the wrong state. Because if it's meant for cooling, then just build one in North Dakota and it'll be so cold you don't need to worry. You can save 30% of your electric costs. But I'm just saying so they have the $25 billion cruising along in this southern state. They're trying to do a similar project in a state, in an East Coast state near us, and they can't get to first base. They're getting blocked at every thing, and people show up, hundreds of people wearing the same T-shirts. Does that feel organic and local to you? So say they win and they block them from going here. Guess what they'll do? They'll do it someplace else. They'll ship the AI around on a fiber optic cable, because even though the antis, the folks that are against everything and are funded to be against everything, they have not yet figured out a way to stop burying fiber optic cables along interstate, like highway right-of-ways on federal land. So we can move data around. It's not like we're not going to have a protest on this pipeline or a protest on a transmission line. We can move it. So this stuff will get invested. It'll get built in America in places that want it, and then the other places will lose. And and the last thing I would say on education is, any of these local places that are saying we don't want it locally, instead of asking for a new gym, and housing and lower electric rates, ask them to provide a customized, individualized tutor for every kid in your school district within that area. And they'd probably say, yeah, we can do that. Sure, we can do that. We'll throw some of our AI towards you locally as part of this thing to build out a model for making sure that, because we know that personalized learning for any individual school kid is the fastest way to improve results. Let's put some of these projects to work doing that. So if anybody is blocking one of these, in my mind, they're not being creative about how to negotiate either on the economics or on the net benefits, because the net benefits are massive to do it. And if they don't want it, others are going to win, and we're going to end up with a bifurcated economy. And frankly, the bifurcated economy is going to look, energy policies kind of look like red state, blue state. I tried to stay away from that, but there's a few pro-energy governors that are running blue or purple states, but largely we're going to see this $1 trillion of capex that's coming, that's going to get distributed. It's going to get distributed very differently, and it's not going to California. California's leading in a couple things. They're going to lead in highest energy prices. They're going to lead in the highest taxes, and then they're going to lead in out-migration. Those are three things. And I'm not being sarcastic. That's just all true. And, of course, the last thing I'll say is at the time of this recent conflict with Iran, California was the only state that was dependent on oil coming through the Strait of Hormuz. 60%, 2 out of 3 barrels of oil comes into California by ship. They've blocked every pipeline. They blocked transmission lines. They've turned themselves proudly into an energy island. And then they're complaining, to this administration about their high energy prices. And even last year, they want to blame the current conflict. Last year, their lowest price in the year was higher than the highest prices in virtually every other state in America. I mean, this was a condition that they created for themselves long before the current conflict, but it's going to get worse for them going forward. And we're doing everything we can to try to help. We've tried to reestablish offshore. They're sitting on massive piles of oil. They were the Kuwait of the Jazz Age. Back in the 20s, they were one of the largest producers of oil in the world, and they've shut down that whole thing. We authorize offshore drilling on federal land. We got that going. They're trying to block the pipelines that are coming in, which would then help them. They used to have 40 refineries. They went down to 8. Now they've got 6. And so Texas, by comparison, has got 36 refineries going to 37. So, any of you, please, if you could be discerning, if any of you could write a story that isn't about the national average price of gasoline, that's a fake thing. The price of gasoline varies by state, varies by policy, varies by taxes, and there's some really rich reporting in there about the choices people have made and the cost that people are going to have. So I would encourage people. It's that's not that hard of a thing, but it would be great if we could get a little more depth into that side of things.
I couldn't agree more. Mr. Secretary, we're way over time here, so I really want to thank you for taking all the time with us here. And please give our best from everybody here to President Trump, and best of luck on all of these fronts moving forward. So thank you, sir.
Thank you, Matt.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Very good.